You have exactly 5 minutes to explain why my signature is currently sitting on a business loan application for your wife. And I suggest you think very carefully before you open your mouth, Dad. If your answer does not satisfy me within those 5 minutes, my next phone call will not be to a family counselor to patch things up. It will be to the FBI to report identity theft and federal wire fraud. Do you understand me? I watched the color drain from my father's face. Otis Vance, the man who had once taught me the value of a hard-earned dollar, now sat across from me in my living room looking like a terrified child caught with his hand in the cookie jar. He wiped a bead of sweat from his forehead and tried to reach for the red legal folder I had slammed onto the glass coffee table between us. I snatched it back before his fingers could graze the evidence. "Nia, please lower your voice," he stammered, avoiding my eyes. Yolanda did not mean any harm. She was just trying to secure capital for the new inventory. "We intended to tell you, but we knew you were busy with your mergers and acquisitions. We were going to pay it back before you even noticed." I felt a cold laugh bubble up in my chest. Before I noticed. They had used my social security number, my credit history, and a forgery of my signature to secure a $50,000 line of credit, and they thought I would not notice. This was the moment I realized that to them, I was no longer a daughter. I was simply a resource to be harvested. My name is Nia Vance. I am 32 years old, and I make my living managing high-stakes financial portfolios for the wealthiest families in Atlanta. I can spot a bad investment from a mile away. But somehow I missed the fact that the worst liability in my life was sitting right at my dinner table. If you have ever had family members who felt entitled to the fruit of your labor simply because they share your DNA, hit that like button and subscribe. Because what I am about to do to my stepmother and the people who enabled her is a masterclass in forensic accounting and sweet revenge. I looked at my Rolex. 4 minutes left, Dad. I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that was far more dangerous than a scream. You say she did not mean harm, but federal law calls this a felony, punishable by up to 30 years in prison. Does Yolanda look like she would survive 30 years in a federal penitentiary? My father flinched. He looked around my apartment, taking in the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, the custom velvet sofa, and the art pieces I had collected over a decade of 80-hour work weeks. He saw the luxury, but he conveniently ignored the sacrifice. "It is just a signature, Nia," he pleaded, his voice cracking. "She is family. She raised you after your mother passed. You have so much money sitting in these accounts. Why do you have to be so cold about it? Marcus needs this leg up. He is your brother." There it was, the real reason. Marcus. My half-brother. The golden child who had never held a job for more than 6 months but always drove a better car than I did. This loan was not for inventory. It was for him. It was always for him. I stood up and walked to the window, keeping my back to him. The anger was gone, replaced by a sharp, clinical clarity. I was done being the safety net. I was done being the villain in their narrative while funding their lifestyle. "You have 3 minutes left," I said without turning around. "And you just wasted one of them trying to guilt-trip me. I do not care if the money was for Marcus or for charity. You crossed a line. You stole my identity. And now I have a choice to make. I can either call the authorities right now and have police cars outside this building in 10 minutes, or you can agree to my terms." I turned back to face him. He was trembling. The silence in the room was heavy, suffocating. He knew I was not bluffing. He had seen me negotiate deals that swallowed companies whole. He just never thought I would turn that weapon on him. "What terms?" he whispered, defeated. I smiled, but it did not reach my eyes. "This Sunday is Mother's Day. I want you and Yolanda and Marcus to come here for dinner. I will not call the police yet. I will treat you all to the finest meal you have ever had, and at that dinner we are going to settle all debts once and for all." He let out a breath of relief, thinking he had won, thinking I had backed down. Oh, Dad, if only you knew. I was not letting them off the hook. I was just gathering them all in one place for the slaughter. Because I had a Mother's Day gift prepared for Yolanda that she would never forget, And unlike the fraudulent loan she took out in my name, this gift was going to be 100% legitimate and legally binding. To understand why I was sitting across from my father with a stack of legal documents, you have to witness the moment I finally snapped. It happened 72 hours earlier at Le Jardin. It is one of those buckhead spots where they charge $20 for avocado toast and the valet judges your car. I did not want to be there. But Yolanda had insisted on a family brunch to celebrate Marcus getting his life back on track, a phrase I had heard at least 6 times in the last decade, usually right before he asked me for a loan. The meal was an exercise in patience. Yolanda ordered the most expensive champagne on the menu without looking at the price. Marcus ordered 2 entrees because he could not decide. My father Otis sat there shrinking into his chair, looking small and tired. He knew they could not afford this, and he knew exactly who they expected to pick up the tab. When the waiter placed the black leather folder on the table, the silence was deafening. It sat there like a landmine. Nobody moved. Marcus was busy scrolling on his phone. Yolanda was checking her makeup in a compact mirror. My father took a sip of water, his hand trembling slightly. Usually, I would just sigh and pull out my black card. That is the role I played. The bank, the safety net, the responsible one. But that morning, something in me felt cold and heavy. I had just finished reviewing my quarterly finances and realized I had spent $40,000 on my family in the last year alone. $40,000 on rent assistance, bail money, and lifestyle maintenance for people who had never once asked me how my day was. So I did not move. I let the check sit there. Yolanda snapped her compact shut. The sound echoed in the sudden quiet. She looked at the check, then at me. Her eyebrows raised in performative confusion. "Well," she said, her voice loud and sharp. "Pick it up, Nia. We are ready to go." I took a slow breath and looked her in the eye. "I picked it up last time, Yolanda. And the time before that. And the time before that. Today is a celebration for Marcus, right? Since he is the one getting his life on track, perhaps he should start by paying for his own lobster tail." The air left the table. Marcus looked up from his phone, his eyes narrowing. Yolanda let out a scoff that sounded like a bark. She reached out and shoved the check folder across the tablecloth. It hit my water glass with a sharp clink. "Do not be tacky, Nia," she hissed. "You know your brother is in a transition period. You are the one with the big fancy job. You are the one flaunting your wealth. God has blessed you so you can bless this family. Do not sit there and act stingy. It is ugly. Stingy." The word hung in the air. I looked at my father, waiting for him to defend me, waiting for him to say that I had paid off his mortgage, that I had paid for his knee surgery. But he just looked down at his plate, wiping his mouth with a napkin, refusing to meet my gaze. That was the moment the camera came out. Marcus held his phone up the red recording light, blinking like an angry eye. He panned from the bill to my face, a sneer curling his lip. "Look at this, y'all," he said, his voice taking on that fake narrator tone he used for his 300 followers. "My rich sister Nia making 6 figures a month, but she will not pay for a family meal. Look at her face. This is what happens when people get money and forget where they came from." I felt the heat rise in my cheeks, not from shame, but from a rage so pure it felt like clarity. I stood up. My chair scraped loudly against the floor. "I am not forgetting where I came from, Marcus," I said, my voice steady. "I am remembering exactly why I need to distance myself from where I am going." I grabbed my purse and walked out. I could hear Yolanda shouting behind me, calling me ungrateful, calling me a traitor. I could feel the eyes of every patron in the restaurant burning into my back. But as I stepped out into the humid Atlanta air, I did not feel guilty. I felt lighter. That $4,000 brunch bill was the cheapest price I could have paid for my freedom. Because as I walked to my car, I decided that the Bank of Nia was officially closed. And the foreclosure process was about to begin. You would think that walking out of the restaurant was the end of the humiliation, but the real knife in the back came 5 minutes later in the parking lot. I was unlocking my car door, my hands shaking with adrenaline when I heard heavy footsteps behind me. It was my father. For a split second, I felt a surge of hope. I thought he had finally grown a backbone. I thought he had followed me out there to apologize for letting his wife treat his daughter like an ATM machine. I thought he was going to say he was proud of me for standing up for myself. I should have known better. Otis Vance did not come outside to defend me. He came outside to manage me. He grabbed my arm, his grip firm, but pleading. "Nia, wait!" He panted out of breath from the short run. "You cannot just leave like that. You are embarrassing us." I pulled my arm away as if his touch burned. "I am embarrassing you," I asked, my voice incredulous. "Your wife just tried to shame me into paying for a $4,000 lunch for a 30-year-old man who plays video games for a living, and I am the one embarrassing the family." My father sighed, the sound rattling deep in his chest. He looked around the parking lot as if checking for witnesses before lowering his voice to that conspiring whisper I hated. "Look, you know how Yolanda is. She is going through a lot right now. Her hormones are all over the place and she is very sensitive about Marcus. She feels like you look down on him." I laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "I do look down on him, Dad. He is a leech. And she is the one attaching him to my veins." "Nia, please," he begged, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Just go back in there, pay the bill and apologize. Do it for me. I have to live with her. If you leave now, she is going to make my life a living hell for weeks. Just be the bigger person. You can afford it. It is just money to you. Just money." Those two words echoed in my head, bouncing off the luxury cars parked around us. Just money. He had no idea. He did not see the 80-hour weeks. He did not see the stress-induced migraines. He did not see the sacrifices I made to build a life where I did not have to worry about the power getting cut off like we did when I was a child. To him, my success was just a bottomless well that he could draw from whenever the peace in his house was threatened. I looked at him, really looked at him for the first time in years. I saw a weak man. A man who would rather sacrifice his daughter's dignity than endure an uncomfortable conversation with his wife. "I am done being the bigger person, Dad," I told him, my voice cold and final. "Being the bigger person just means standing still while you all take bigger chunks out of me. I paid for your knee surgery last year out of pocket because Yolanda spent the insurance money on a cruise. I gave you $50,000 to fix the roof, and somehow that money turned into a new sound system for Marcus. I have been the bigger person my whole life, and look where it got me. Standing in a parking lot being told to apologize for being abused." He flinched as if I had slapped him. But he did not deny it. He just looked at his shoes, defeated. "Go back inside, Dad," I said, opening my car door. "Go pay for the champagne your wife ordered, and if you cannot afford it, maybe Marcus can wash dishes." I drove away, leaving him standing there. But as I look at him now, sitting on my velvet sofa, twisting his hat in his hands, I realize that the man in the parking lot never really left. He is still here, trying to smooth things over, trying to ask me to understand. But the bank is closed, and the time for understanding is over. Now it is time for accounting. But the disrespect did not end with my father in the parking lot. There was one more voice that chimed in that day, one that makes my blood boil just thinking about it. Caleb, my sister Zora's husband. A man who has not held a steady job since the Obama administration, but somehow always has an opinion on how I should spend my bonus checks. You have to picture this. Caleb is white. And usually I do not care about who loves who, but watching this Caucasian man sit at a table full of black folks and lecture me about our culture was a level of irony I was not prepared for. While Yolanda was shouting and Marcus was filming, Caleb sat there leaning back in his chair, swirling his third mimosa with a look of smug superiority. He waited for a lull in the screaming to deliver his sermon. As I was gathering my things to leave the table before my father followed me out, Caleb decided it was his moment to play peacemaker. He cleared his throat and adjusted his glasses, looking at me with those condescending eyes that he thinks convey wisdom, but actually just convey unemployment. "Nia," he said, his voice dripping with faux concern and unearned confidence. You have to understand that in the African American community, family is the bedrock. It is about the village. It is about lifting each other up. When one of us makes it, we all make it. That is the beauty of the culture. You cannot just apply these cold corporate American values to your own kin. It is culturally insensitive to turn your back on Marcus. You are breaking the circle. I froze. I actually stopped putting my wallet in my purse and looked at him. The sheer audacity. The room seemed to tilt on its axis. Here was a man whose contribution to the village was draining my sister's savings account to fund his failed crypto trading career. A man who lived in a house my grandmother paid for driving a car my sister bought wearing a watch that I gave him for Christmas. And he was sitting there lecturing me, a black woman who has had to work twice as hard to get half as far, about what it means to support family. He was weaponizing my own heritage against me, using buzzwords he probably picked up from a podcast to shame me into submission. He was not defending the culture. He was defending his right to be a parasite. I leaned over the table, planting my hands on the white cloth so I was towering over him. The low angle meant he had to crane his neck to look up at me, reducing him to the size of a child. "Caleb," I said, my voice quiet, but sharp enough to cut glass. "Do not ever lecture me about my culture. Especially when the only thing you contribute to this family is credit card debt and empty platitudes. You want to talk about the village. The village works because everyone contributes. The village works because we protect each other, not exploit each other." He tried to interrupt, but I raised a finger, silencing him. "I fund 3 scholarships for students in this city, Caleb. I invest in Black-owned businesses. I pay property taxes on the house you are sleeping in for free. That is supporting the village. What you are doing is called freeloading. So unless you want to discuss why Zora had to take a second shift to cover your bad investments, I suggest you keep your cultural anthropology lessons to yourself and focus on finding a job." Caleb turned a shade of red that clashed violently with his pastel polo shirt. He snapped his mouth shut and looked down at his plate, shrinking just like my father would later do in the parking lot. But unlike my father, Caleb was not shrinking from shame. He was shrinking from fear. He knew that I knew his secrets. He knew I was the one who helped Zora balance the books every month. And he knew that if I decided to open my mouth about where the money was really going, his free ride would be over. That was the mistake they all made. They thought because I was quiet, I was blind. They thought because I paid the bills, I was a fool. But standing over Caleb, watching him crumble under the weight of the truth, I realized something important. This was not just about Yolanda and Marcus. The rot in this family went deep. And if I was going to cut it out, I would need a scalpel sharp enough to sever every single toxic tie, even the ones connected by marriage. I walked out of that restaurant vibrating with rage, but also with a plan forming in the back of my mind. They wanted a village. Fine. I was about to burn theirs to the ground. I returned to my penthouse apartment, still vibrating with the energy of the confrontation. I poured myself a glass of water and tried to decompress, standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the Atlanta skyline. I told myself I was done. I told myself I would block their numbers and move on with my life. But the universe has a funny way of escalating things when you are trying to find peace. That was when my phone lit up on the marble kitchen island. It was not a text from my father apologizing. It was not a nasty message from Yolanda. It was a push notification from my identity theft protection service. The banner across the screen read "Urgent. New account opened." I felt a cold drop in my stomach. I unlocked my laptop and my fingers flew across the keyboard. I logged into the secure portal, my heart rate picking up speed. I expected to see maybe a small inquiry or perhaps a mistake, but what I saw made the room spin. There was a hard inquiry on my credit report from a dealership in Decatur. It was dated yesterday. And right below it was a new active installment loan. $72,000. I clicked on the details, my hand shaking slightly on the trackpad. A Ford F-150, Platinum Edition. The kind of truck Marcus had been posting about on Instagram for months. The kind of truck he could never afford with his credit score, which was lower than his temperature. But the name on the loan was not Marcus Vance. It was Nia Vance. They had used my social security number, the number I had trusted my father with years ago for an emergency medical form when I was in college. They had kept it, and now they had weaponized it. I sat back in my chair. The silence in the apartment was heavy. This was no longer a dispute about a brunch bill. This was no longer about them being ungrateful or manipulative. This was a felony. Identity theft, wire fraud, false impersonation. They had crossed the line from toxic family dynamics into criminal activity. I navigated to the document repository section of the credit site. I downloaded the preliminary loan documents. I stared at the digital signature at the bottom of the contract. It was a clumsy forgery of my own hand. A child could have spotted the difference, but the finance manager at the dealership clearly did not care, as long as the credit score was over 800. I looked at the date stamp. They must have signed these papers while I was at work yesterday. While I was grinding to build my future, they were sitting in a dealership office stealing it. A strange calm washed over me. The hurt was gone. The disappointment was gone. All that was left was the cold, hard resolve of a financial auditor finding embezzlement. I hit print. The sound of the printer rhythmically spitting out the pages sounded like a gavel banging in a courtroom. I organized them into a bright red legal folder. They wanted to treat me like a bank. Fine. They were about to learn what happens when you rob one. I was not just a sister anymore. I was the prosecution, and I had all the evidence I needed to put my own brother behind bars. I stared at the fraudulent loan documents on my screen and felt a strange transformation taking place. The hurt little girl who just wanted her father's approval evaporated. In her place stood the woman corporate Atlanta feared. My name is Nia Vance. I am 32 years old, and I am a senior debt restructuring specialist for one of the largest private equity firms in the South. Do you know what that means? It means when a Fortune 500 company is bleeding money due to corruption or mismanagement, they call me. I am the surgeon who cuts out the rot. I track down hidden assets in the Cayman Islands. I unravel complex shell companies designed to evade taxes. I have made grown men cry in boardrooms simply by sliding a highlighted spreadsheet across a mahogany table. My family sees the designer bags and the penthouse view, and they think I am just lucky. They think money just falls into my lap. They have no idea that my brain is wired to see patterns in numbers that others miss. They have no idea that I can look at a bank statement and tell you exactly where you were at 2 a.m. 3 weeks ago. And that is their fatal mistake. Yolanda, Marcus, and Caleb did not just steal from a family member, they stole from a forensic accountant. They forged the signature of a woman who reads fine print for sport. They took out a loan in the name of someone who knows exactly how to legally dismantle a debtor life piece by piece until there is nothing left but regret. If they had stolen from anyone else, they might have gotten away with it. They might have gotten a slap on the wrist. But they stole from me. And in my line of work, we do not just ask for our money back. We liquidate assets, we garnish wages, we seize collateral, and we ensure that the credit score of the perpetrator never recovers. I poured myself a glass of vintage Cabernet and sat back on my sofa looking directly at you. Yes, you. The person watching this who has been told to keep the peace. The person who has been told that family is everything even when that family is toxic. The person who has been guilted into setting themselves on fire to keep others warm. I see you. I am about to show you exactly how I turn the tables. I am not going to scream. I am not going to fight. I am going to use the legal system and financial leverage to execute the most precise and devastating revenge you have ever seen. If you have ever wanted to see a toxic relative get served a slice of humble pie with a side of legal consequences, hit that like button right now. Subscribe to this channel if you believe that boundaries are necessary for survival. And let me know in the comments below if you have ever had to cut off a family member to save your own future. Grab your popcorn and maybe a notepad because class is in session. What I am about to do to my stepmother is not just revenge, it is a hostile takeover. And unlike the loan they took out in my name, the interest on this payback is going to be 100%. I drove straight to my father's house in a fugue state. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. I had the red folder on the passenger seat beside me. Inside were the loan documents, the credit report, and the undeniable proof that my stepmother and brother had committed a federal crime against me. I was naive enough to think that once I showed my father the black and white evidence, he would finally wake up. I thought he would be horrified. I thought he would protect me. I parked in the driveway of the house I had helped him refinance 3 years ago. I marched to the front door and keyed myself in. They were in the kitchen. The smell of fried chicken and resentment hung in the air. Yolanda was at the stove and my father was sitting at the island reading the paper. I did not say hello. I slammed the folder down on the granite countertop with a sound like a gunshot. "Explain this," I demanded, my voice trembling with rage. "Explain to me why I have a $72,000 truck loan in my name that I never signed for." My father jumped, dropping his paper. Yolanda turned around slowly, wiping her hands on a dish towel. She did not look scared. She looked annoyed. "What are you talking about?" "Nia," she asked, her voice dripping with feigned innocence. "Why do you always come in here bringing drama?" I opened the folder and spread the papers out. "This is not drama, Yolanda. This is a credit report. Look at the date. Look at the signature. It is a forgery. You used my social security number to buy Marcus a truck." Yolanda walked over and glanced at the papers. She let out a scoff. "Anyone can type up papers on a computer, Nia. Is this what you do at that big fancy job of yours? You forge documents to frame your own brother because you are jealous of him." I felt the room spin. Jealous. She was accusing me of forging the documents that proved she forged documents. It was gaslighting of the highest order. "Dad, look at this," I pleaded, turning to him. "You know my signature. You know I did not buy this truck. They stole my identity." My father looked at the papers. Then he looked at Yolanda. She was staring him down, her eyes narrowing into a silent threat. I could see the calculation happening in his brain. If he agreed with me, he would have to admit his wife was a criminal. He would have to kick her out. He would have to be alone. He looked back at me and his face hardened. "Nia, I think you are taking this too far," he said, his voice quiet and firm. "Too far," I shouted. "Dad, they committed a felony." "Lower your voice in my house," he snapped, slamming his hand on the table. "I do not know where these papers came from, but Yolanda would never do that. She loves you. Marcus loves you. If there is a loan, maybe it was a mistake, or maybe you offered to help and forgot. But coming in here and accusing your mother of being a thief? That is unacceptable." I stared at him, unable to breathe. He was choosing the lie. He was looking at the truth and choosing the comfortable lie because he was too weak to deal with the reality. "You need to leave, Nia," he said, turning his back to me. "Go home and cool off, and do not come back until you are ready to apologize to Yolanda." Yolanda smiled, a small victorious smirk that she hid behind her hand as she turned back to the stove. I gathered my papers slowly. My hands were no longer shaking. A cold numbness had taken over. I realized then that the father I loved was gone. He had been replaced by this shell of a man who would burn his daughter to keep his wife warm. "I will leave," I said, my voice dead calm. "But remember this moment, Dad. Remember that you had a chance to fix this. You had a chance to be a father. And you chose to be an accomplice." I walked out of the house without looking back. As I sat in my car in the driveway, I did not cry. I picked up my phone and dialed the number for a private investigator. The time for confrontation was over. The time for war had just begun. By the time I parked my car in my building garage, my phone was vibrating so hard against the center console it sounded like an angry hornet. I glanced at the screen and saw 50 notifications from Facebook. My heart sank. I knew exactly what was happening. In the modern era, toxic families do not just scream at you in the kitchen. They put you on trial in the court of public opinion. I got into the elevator and opened the app. There it was, a long rambling post from Marcus. He had posted a photo of me from my LinkedIn profile looking professional and polished, next to a photo of himself looking disheveled and sad. The caption read, "It breaks my heart to air family business, but I do not know where else to turn." My own sister, Nia Vance, has turned her back on the people who raised her. We are struggling to keep the lights on and put food on the table while she lives in a penthouse and drinks $1,000 wine. We asked her for help with medical bills for Dad, and she laughed in our faces and threatened to call the police. It is sad how money changes people. Please pray for our family. I stood in my foyer reading the lies. Medical bills. He had the nerve to say medical bills when I had the loan documents for a $70,000 truck in my purse. But the internet does not care about facts. The internet cares about emotion. The comments were pouring in like sewage. People I went to high school with, people from our old church, even strangers were tearing me apart. They called me a sellout. They called me selfish. They said I had forgotten where I came from. Marcus had successfully weaponized his own mediocrity and painted me as the villain in his struggle story. Then the phone calls started. First, it was Auntie Bernice, a woman I had not spoken to since she tried to steal a centerpiece from my college graduation party. I let it go to voicemail. "Nia, this is your Auntie Bernice. I just saw what your brother posted. You ought to be ashamed of yourself, girl. Your mother is rolling in her grave. You got all that money and you cannot help your own flesh and blood. Do not forget who wiped your nose. You better fix this before God fixes you." I deleted the voicemail, but the calls kept coming. Cousins I never met, uncles who only called when they needed bail money. They were all suddenly experts on my financial obligations. It was a coordinated attack designed to break me. They wanted to shame me into submission. They wanted me to panic, to call Marcus and beg him to take it down, promising to pay whatever he wanted just to stop the harassment. But they forgot who they were dealing with. I did not cry. I did not reply to the comments defending myself. I did not engage in a messy back and forth that would only give them more fuel. Instead, I walked into my home office and sat down at my triple monitor setup. I opened a new folder on my desktop and named it Defamation. I started taking screenshots. Every lie Marcus posted, every threat in the comments, every harassing text message. I documented the timestamps. I traced the IP addresses of the fake accounts Marcus was using to boost his own post. He thought he was ruining my reputation. In reality, he was handing me a loaded gun. In the state of Georgia, falsely accusing someone of a crime or professional misconduct to damage their reputation is actionable per se. By lying about me ignoring medical bills, he was attacking my character. By claiming I abandoned them while holding a fiduciary license, he was attacking my career. I worked through the night capturing every single pixel of their hatred. Let them scream, let them post, let them think they are winning, because when I serve them with the lawsuit for libel and character assassination alongside the fraud charges, these Facebook posts are going to be the nails in their financial coffin. Marcus wanted attention. Well, he was about to get the attention of every lawyer in Atlanta. The smear campaign was not a tragedy, it was evidence. The next morning, I was back in my sanctuary, my corner office on the 45th floor of the Sovereign Building. This was the only place where the chaos of the Vance family could not touch me, or so I thought. I was in the middle of reviewing a merger agreement when my intercom buzzed. My assistant sounded hesitant. "Nia, your brother-in-law is here. He says it is a family emergency." I sighed, rubbing my temples. "Caleb." I debated telling security to escort him out, but curiosity got the better of me. I wanted to see what kind of emergency required a personal visit during market hours. "Send him in," I said. Caleb walked in, looking completely out of place against the backdrop of mahogany and steel. He was wearing cargo shorts and a polo shirt that had seen better days. He looked around the office with hungry eyes, taking in the expensive art and the view. He sat down in the client chair without being invited. "Hey, Nia," he said, giving me a tight smile. "I know things are crazy right now with Marcus and the Facebook stuff. I just wanted to come by and see if I could mediate. You know, bridge the gap." I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms. You drove 40 minutes into the city to bridge the gap, Caleb. You could have just sent a text. What do you really want? He laughed nervously, shifting in his seat. You are always so direct. I like that about you. Look, I know Yolanda and Marcus are out of line. I told Zora that they shouldn't be airing dirty laundry online. I am on your side here, Nia. I really am. I waited. I knew there was a but coming. But he continued, leaning forward. Since I am helping to smooth things over, I was hoping you could help me out with a small situation. I have this investment opportunity. It is a new cryptocurrency. My buddy says it is going to the moon by next week. I just need a little capital to get in on the ground floor. 10,000. I can double it and pay you back by Friday. I stared at him. The silence stretched out until he started fidgeting. The audacity was breathtaking. My stepmother had stolen my identity. My brother was destroying my reputation online. And here was my brother-in-law, the man who had lectured me about cultural obligations 2 days ago, asking me to fund his gambling addiction. Get out, I said, my voice low and dangerous. Caleb blinked. What? Come on, Nia. It is a loan. I will sign a paper. I stood up and walked to the door, holding it open. You came to my place of business. You used a fake family emergency to get past my assistant. And you have the nerve to ask me for money to buy imaginary internet coins while your wife is working double shifts to pay the rent. His face turned red. He stood up, his nice guy mask slipping. You know this is why they hate you. You sit up here in your ivory tower and think you are better than everyone. You are cold, Nia. You are going to die alone with your money. I smiled. I would rather die alone with my money than live together with your debt. Security is on the way, Caleb. I suggest you leave before they ban you from the building permanently. He stormed out, muttering curses under his breath. I watched him go, feeling a strange sense of satisfaction. They were desperate. They were attacking me from all sides, but they were also revealing their weaknesses. Caleb was greedy and broke. Marcus was reckless. Yolanda was arrogant. I closed the door and went back to my desk. I picked up my phone and dialed the number for my private investigator. I had a new target to add to the list. If Caleb wanted to play the high-stakes game, he was about to learn that the house always wins. With the door closed and the silence of my office restored, I turned my attention to the most critical phase of my operation. Dealing with Caleb was just pest control. Dealing with Yolanda required a surgical strike. I knew my father. Even if I proved the fraud, even if I showed him the forged documents, he might still hesitate to leave her. He was terrified of being alone, and he was terrified of the financial ruin that comes with a gray divorce. In the state of Georgia where we live, equitable distribution laws meant that if my father filed for divorce, Yolanda could legally claim 50% of everything he owned: his pension, his savings, the house I had helped him refinance. After 10 years of marriage, she had her claws deep into his estate. If I simply exposed the truck loan, she might panic and file for divorce first, taking half of his life's work with her. I could not let that happen. As a financial strategist, I know that you never trigger a liquidation event until you have secured your assets. And in this case, the only way to protect my father's assets was to prove that Yolanda had breached the marital contract first. I needed leverage that would make her walk away with nothing but the clothes on her back. I picked up my secure line and dialed a number I had not used since I audited a corrupt CEO 3 years ago. Jackson. He was not cheap, but he was the best private investigator in Atlanta. He picked up on the second ring. Nia Vance Jackson, said, his voice gravelly and professional. To what do I owe the pleasure? I need a full surveillance package on a woman named Yolanda Vance, I said, swiveling my chair to look out at the skyline. She is 55 years old, lives in Decatur, drives a white Lexus that my father pays for. What are we looking for? Jackson asked. Hidden assets, gambling debts. All of the above, I replied. But specifically, I need proof of infidelity. I heard the scratching of a pen on paper. Do you have a lead? I pulled up Yolanda's credit card statements on my second monitor. I had gained access to them when I started digging into the identity theft. I highlighted a recurring charge. She spends $300 a week at a boutique gym in Buckhead called Iron Sculpt, I said. But according to her social media, she never posts workout photos. And these charges always happen on Tuesday and Thursday nights when my father is at his bridge club. I want you to find out exactly what kind of exercise she is doing and who she is doing it with. Consider it done, Jackson said. If she is stepping out, I will get it in 4K resolution. I authorized the retainer fee immediately, $5,000. It was a lot of money to spend on a hunch, but I looked at it as an insurance premium. If Jackson found what I suspected he would find, it would save my father hundreds of thousands of dollars in alimony. I hung up the phone and leaned back. This was the difference between me and them. They operated on impulse and greed. They saw a truck and wanted it, so they stole my identity. I operated on strategy. I was not just going to catch them. I was going to dismantle them legally and financially. I was building a case so airtight that by the time I served the main course at Mother's Day dinner, Yolanda would not just be divorced. She would be destitute. The trap was set. Now all I had to do was wait for the rat to take the cheese. It took Jackson exactly 48 hours to deliver the goods. I was sitting in my home office sipping chamomile tea and trying to lower my blood pressure after a long day of reviewing distressed assets when my secure email pinged. The subject line was short and professional. Project Y surveillance results. My hand hovered over the mouse. I knew what I was hoping to find, but a small part of me, the part that still remembered the day my father married Yolanda, was hoping I was wrong. I was hoping she was just a shopaholic or a liar, not a cheater. My father worshipped the ground she walked on. He defended her against his own children. He compromised his financial future to keep her happy. If she was stepping out on him, it would not just break his heart, it would shatter his reality. I clicked open. The first attachment was a time-stamped log of her movements. Tuesday night, 7 p.m. She left the house in the white Lexus, but she did not go to Iron Sculpt in Buckhead. She drove 20 minutes in the opposite direction to a budget motel on the outskirts of town called the Starlight. I opened the folder labeled Photos. Jackson earned every penny of his fee. The images were crystal clear, shot with a long-range telephoto lens. There was Yolanda stepping out of her car, checking her reflection in the side mirror. She looked excited, nervous like a teenager sneaking out. And then the door to room 104 opened. I gasped aloud in the empty room. I recognized him immediately. It was not a stranger. It was DeAndre, the 20-something personal trainer she had introduced to us at the 4th of July barbecue 2 months ago. She had told my father he was her distant cousin from Macon who had just moved to the city. My father had welcomed him. He had grilled ribs for him. He had shaken his hand and told him that family is always welcome here. I clicked through the rest of the photos. Yolanda kissing DeAndre in the doorway. Yolanda handing him a thick envelope, which I assumed contained cash. My father's cash. The cash I had given my father for home repairs. The nausea rose in my throat, but I swallowed it down, forcing myself to think like a strategist. This was not just a betrayal. This was the golden ticket. In the state of Georgia, adultery is one of the few grounds that can bar a spouse from receiving alimony. If I could prove that the affair was the cause of the separation, Yolanda would not get a dime of ongoing support. I saved the files to 3 different hard drives and a cloud server. I looked at the photo of Yolanda laughing with her lover, her hand resting possessively on his chest. She looked so confident, so untouchable. She had no idea that the lens of justice had already captured her. She thought she was playing my father for a fool, but she had just handed me the weapon that would leave her homeless. The first pillar of her defense had just crumbled. Now it was time to move on to Marcus. With Yolanda's coffin nailed shut by the photos of her infidelity, I turned my attention to the second parasite in the family ecosystem, Marcus. My brother had always been reckless, but as I dug into the supplementary financial reports Jackson had sent over, I realized that the truck loan was just the tip of the iceberg. It was the desperate move of a drowning man. I pulled up Marcus's bank statements. To the untrained eye, they looked like the chaotic spending of a man with no impulse control. Fast food, liquor stores, gas stations, but I look for patterns. And there it was, a recurring cash withdrawal of $500 every Monday and Thursday. And then there were the peer-to-peer transfers. Venmo payments to a user named Easy Money Sniper, followed by frantic request notes begging for more time. I cross-referenced the dates with the local sports schedule. Every time the Atlanta Falcons lost, Marcus withdrew cash. Every time the Hawks played an away game, the transfers spiked. My brother was not just unemployed, he was a degenerate gambler, and he was losing bad. I picked up the phone and called Jackson back. "I need you to run a trace on a Venmo handle," I said, giving him the details. "Find out who is on the receiving end of these payments." 10 minutes later, Jackson texted me back with a name, Silas Thorne. I knew that name. Silas was not a bank. He was a hard money lender who operated out of a pawn shop on the south side. He was the kind of guy who did not report to credit bureaus. He reported to your kneecaps. According to the ledger Jackson had accessed, Marcus owed Silas nearly $15,000. That explained why he needed the truck. He was likely planning to sell it for parts or flip it to pay off his gambling debts before Silas came collecting. He had stolen my identity to save his own skin. A slow smile spread across my face. Most sisters would be terrified. Most sisters would call their brother and beg him to get help, but I am not most sisters. Not. I am a debt buyer. In my world, distressed debt is a commodity. And right now, Marcus's life was trading at a discount. I did not call Marcus. I called Silas. When he answered, his voice was suspicious. "Who is this?" "This is the person who is going to solve your Marcus Vance problem," I said, my voice crisp and professional. "I understand he owes you $15,000. And I understand he is behind on payments." There was a pause. "You a cop?" "I am an investor," I replied. "I want to purchase the debt. I will wire you the full principal amount of $15,000 right now. In exchange, you will sign over the promissory note and all collection rights to me. Legally." Silas laughed, a dry, rasping sound. "You want to pay off a deadbeat's debt. You must be his guardian angel." "No," I said, staring at my reflection in the dark window. "I am his new owner." We closed the deal in less than an hour. I wired the money and Silas emailed me the signed assignment of debt. I printed it out and held it in my hands. It was just a piece of paper, but it carried the weight of a chain. Marcus didn't owe a dangerous criminal anymore. He owed me. And unlike Silas, I wasn't going to break his legs. I was going to break his spirit. I placed the document in the red folder next to Yolanda's photos. The trap was almost full. Only one rat left to catch. 2 down, 1 to go. I sat in my home office, surrounded by the digital ruins of my stepmother and brother lives. But the circle was not complete without Caleb. My brother-in-law was the most insidious kind of parasite because he hid behind the shield of being a supportive husband. He claimed to be an entrepreneur. He claimed to be building a legacy for my sister Zora. But I knew better. I logged into the family trust portal. Years ago, I had set up a high-yield savings account for Zora. It was supposed to be her nest egg, a safety net for when she finally realized that marrying Caleb was a mistake. I had access to view the statements as the trustee, but I had never interfered. Until tonight. I clicked on the account summary, and my breath hitched. The balance should have been over $40,000. It was sitting at $4,000. My heart broke for Zora. She was pulling double shifts at the hospital, ruining her back and her sleep schedule, believing that she was securing their future. Meanwhile, Caleb was draining the account dry. I pulled the transaction history. It was death by 1,000 cuts. Withdrawals of $200 here, $500 there, all labeled as business expenses or angel investments. But I know how to read merchant category codes. These were not investments. I cross-referenced a charge labeled consulting fee on February 14th. Valentine's Day. Zora had been working a 12-hour shift that night. I remembered because she called me on her break crying from exhaustion. But according to this statement, Caleb had spent $300 at a steakhouse in Midtown. I sent the transaction details to Jackson. 10 minutes later, he sent back a credit card receipt image he had pulled from the restaurant's digital archive. It was signed by Caleb. But the table was for two, and the timestamp showed he was there for 3 hours. I kept digging. I found a charge for a charm bracelet from Tiffany's. Zora doesn't wear silver, she only wears gold, and she had never mentioned getting a blue box recently. Then came the smoking gun, a recurring payment for a rental apartment in a trendy complex near the university. It was listed as office space rental in the ledger. But when Jackson ran the address, it was a residential unit, and the tenant listed on the lease was not Caleb. It was a 22-year-old graduate student named Amber. The rage I felt was different from what I felt for Yolanda or Marcus. This was personal. Zora was the only one in the family who treated me with decency, even if she was too weak to stand up to them. Caleb was not just stealing her money, he was stealing her life. He was using her sweat and tears to play sugar daddy to a college student while lecturing me about family values. I printed the bank statements, the receipt from the steakhouse, and the lease agreement for the love nest. I clipped them together with a photo Jackson had snagged of Caleb and Amber walking hand in hand out of the apartment. I placed the file on top of the others. The trinity of betrayal was complete. Yolanda was a cheater, Marcus was a criminal, and Caleb was a thief. They were all guilty, and they were all coming to dinner on Sunday. I closed the folder and turned off the lights. The investigation was over. It was time for the execution. Buying a human being is illegal in the United States, but buying their financial soul is perfectly legal if you know who to call. With the gambling debt from Silas secured, I turned my attention to the rest of Marcus's financial history. I pulled up his credit report again and focused on the section labeled charged-off accounts. These are the debts that banks have given up on. The credit card bills he never paid. The personal loans he defaulted on 3 years ago. To a bank, these accounts are trash. Dead weight on their balance sheet. But to me, they were ammunition. I saw that the majority of his bad debt was held by a collection agency called Summit Receivables. They were aggressive. They were likely calling his phone 5 times a day. But they did not know Marcus like I did. They did not know that he was unemployed and legally judgment-proof because he owned no assets in his own name. To them, he was just a bad statistic. I dialed the number for their corporate acquisitions department. I did not call as a sister. I called as the manager of a private distressed asset fund. "This is Nia Vance representing Vance Capital," I said when the agent picked up. "I am looking at a portfolio of consumer debt you are currently holding. Specifically, the accounts associated with a Mr. Marcus Vance." I heard the typing on the other end. "Yes, we have those accounts. The total outstanding balance with interest and penalties is $28,000. Are you calling to make a payment on his behalf?" I laughed, a short, cold sound. "Absolutely not. I am calling to make you an offer. I want to purchase the assignment of judgment for these accounts." The agent paused. "Ma'am, we usually do not sell individual accounts like this." I cut him off. "Look at the file. The debtor has no income, no property. His credit score is under 500. You have been sitting on this debt for 2 years and you haven't collected a dime. You and I both know you are never going to see that $28,000. It is a tax write-off waiting to happen." I waited, letting the silence do the work. I knew how these agencies operated. They bought debt for pennies on the dollar and tried to squeeze blood from a stone. If I offered them guaranteed cash, they would take it. "I will offer you 10 cents on the dollar," I said firmly. $2,800. Cash wire transfer today. You clear the books, and I take the headache off your hands." He put me on hold. I checked my nails. 2 minutes later, he came back. "Make it 3,000 and it is yours." "Done," I said. Send over the contract. 10 minutes later, the email arrived. I electronically signed the purchase agreement and wired the funds. Just like that, I was no longer just Marcus's sister. I was his primary creditor. I now owned the rights to garnish his future wages. I could seize any tax refunds he might get. I could put a lien on any property he might inherit. I printed out the assignment of debt and held it up to the light. It was beautiful. Marcus had spent his whole life thinking the world owed him something. He thought he could walk away from his obligations without consequences. He did not realize that while he was playing checkers, I was playing chess. I had bought his freedom for $3,000. And when he walked into my house for dinner on Sunday, he was going to find out that the interest rate on betraying me was about to skyrocket. The financial trap was set, and it was legally watertight. Now all I had to do was get the mice to come to the cheese. I sat on my living room floor, surrounded by the red legal folders. To anyone else, it might have looked like I was preparing for a tax audit, but to me, it looked like a loaded weapon. I had the evidence of Yolanda's affair. I had the assignment of debt for Marcus. I had the proof of Caleb's embezzlement. The chamber was full. Now all I needed was to get the targets into the firing line. I picked up my phone and opened the family group chat. It had been silent for 2 days since I stopped responding to their harassment. They were probably wondering if I had finally broken. They were probably expecting a lawsuit or a restraining order. They certainly were not expecting a surrender. I took a deep breath and typed out the message I had rehearsed in my head a dozen times. It had to sound beaten. It had to sound like the plea of a daughter desperate for her father's approval. "Hey everyone!" I typed. I have been doing a lot of thinking over the last few days. The online comments and the silence really got to me. I realized that family is more important than money, and I hate that we are fighting like this. I want to make things right. Please come to my apartment this Sunday for Mother's Day dinner. I have prepared special gifts for everyone to show you how much I appreciate you. I think you will be very happy with what I have decided to do regarding the truck and the loans. I hesitated for a split second before hitting send. Was it too thick? Would they smell the trap? Then I remembered who I was dealing with. Narcissists do not suspect traps because they believe they are entitled to everything. They believe the world revolves around them. I hit send. I watched the screen. 1 second, 2 seconds. The read receipts popped up instantly. Yolanda, Marcus, Caleb, Dad. They were all glued to their phones, probably waiting for me to crack. The typing bubbles appeared immediately. It was like a race to see who could claim the victory first. Yolanda was the first to reply. "I am glad you finally came to your senses, Nia. We are a family and we forgive you. We will be there at 6. Make sure you order that catering from the place I like." Then came Marcus. "Does this mean I get to keep the truck, sis?" I replied. "We will discuss all the financial details on Sunday. I have a big surprise for you." Caleb chimed in. "Proud of you, Nia. Takes a big person to admit they were wrong. Looking forward to the good news." My father sent a simple thumbs-up emoji, followed by a text. "I knew you would do the right thing. Love you." I put the phone down and let out a laugh that echoed off the empty walls of my penthouse. The right thing. He thought the right thing was me rolling over and letting them drain me dry. He had no idea that the right thing was actually justice. They had taken the bait hook, line, and sinker. They were not coming for dinner. They were coming for the payout. They thought they were walking into a victory lap where I would hand over checks and apologize for being selfish. They were already spending the money in their heads. Yolanda was probably booking a vacation. Marcus was probably picking out rims for the truck. Caleb was probably planning his next date with his mistress. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights. "Enjoy the fantasy for a few more days," I whispered to the glass. "Because on Sunday, reality is going to hit you like a freight train." The trap was set, the players were in motion, and I was ready to close the deal. The audacity of the woman was breathtaking. Less than an hour after I sent the message inviting them to dinner, Yolanda did not just accept the olive branch, she tried to beat me with it. My phone pinged with a new notification. It was a shared note from Yolanda titled Mother's Day Wishlist. I opened it expecting maybe a spa day or a nice piece of jewelry. What I saw made me laugh out loud in the quiet of my office. It was not a wish list. It was a ransom note. Item number 1 was a Chanel Classic flat bag in black caviar leather. Retail price $10,000. She had even included a link to the specific boutique in Buckhead to make sure I did not buy the wrong size. Item number 2 was a first-class trip to the Maldives for her and my father. 7 nights in an overwater bungalow. She noted that they needed a break to heal from the trauma I had caused the family. I sat there staring at the screen. She was shaking me down. She genuinely believed that I was so desperate for her approval that I would spend $30,000 just to get her to stop badmouthing me on Facebook. She thought she had broken me. She thought the Bank of Nia was back open for business and she was ready to make a withdrawal. I could have ignored it. I could have told her she was delusional. But a strategist knows that when your enemy is making a mistake, you do not interrupt them. You encourage them. You let them get comfortable. You let them think they are safe. I opened our text thread. I saw the list, Yolanda. I typed, my fingers flying across the glass screen. You have excellent taste. I think a vacation is exactly what you and Dad need. I will have the itinerary printed out for you on Sunday, and I will make sure there is a special black box waiting for you at the table. The reply came instantly. 3 heart emojis and a prayer hand emoji. Thank you, Nia. I knew you would do the right thing. God loves a cheerful giver. I almost threw up in my mouth. A cheerful giver. I was about to give her something all right, but it wasn't a handbag. Then the floodgates opened. Once Marcus saw that I had agreed to Yolanda's demands, he circled back about the truck. So the truck is mine, right? He texted. I need to know so I can order these custom rims. I replied instantly. The truck is handled, Marcus. Bring the paperwork you have and we will finalize everything on Sunday. Then came Caleb. Hey, Nia, glad we are moving past this. About that crypto opportunity, the window is closing soon. If you could bring a check on Sunday, that would be huge for the family portfolio. I did not even hesitate. I will have a check ready for you, Caleb, I texted back. I put my phone down on the coffee table. It was done. I had promised them the world. I had promised them luxury handbags, exotic vacations, custom trucks, and investment capital. I had promised them everything they ever wanted. And technically, I wasn't lying. I was going to give them exactly what they deserved. Yolanda was getting a trip, but it wasn't to the Maldives. It was a trip to reality. Marcus was getting the truck paperwork, but it was a repossession order. And Caleb was getting a check, but it was going to be a reality check. They were going to walk into my house on Sunday expecting a coronation. They were going to leave with nothing but the clothes on their backs and a lifetime of regret. I picked up my wine glass and toasted the empty room. To cheerful giving, I whispered, because I was going to enjoy giving them this lesson more than anything I had ever bought in my life. The trap was not just set, it was baited with gold, and they had swallowed it whole. Sunday morning arrived with a sky as gray as steel, which felt entirely appropriate for what I was about to do. I woke up at 6, feeling a strange sense of calm. Today was the day. The day I stopped being a victim and started being the executioner. But before the caterers arrived with the lobster tails and the vintage champagne, I had a much more important delivery scheduled. At 9 sharp, the buzzer to my penthouse rang. It was not the florist. It was the muscle. I opened the door to find 3 men standing in the hallway. They were built like linebackers, but dressed like Secret Service agents. Black suits, crisp white shirts, and earpieces that vanished into their collars. Leading them was Tyrell, the head of the executive protection firm I had retained. I had worked with Tyrell before during a particularly hostile corporate takeover where a former CEO threatened to burn down the building. He was expensive, silent, and effective. Good morning, Ms. Vance, Tyrell said, stepping inside and scanning the room with professional paranoia. We are here to secure the perimeter. I walked him through the layout of the apartment. I showed him the dining room where the massacre would take place. I showed him the study which had a direct line of sight to the table but was shielded by frosted glass doors. I need your team to stay in the study, I instructed. I want you invisible. They need to believe that we are alone. They need to feel comfortable enough to reveal their true colors. If they see security, they will put their masks back on. I want them unmasked. Tyrell nodded. What are the rules of engagement? I straightened the cuffs of my silk blouse. You do not intervene when the yelling starts. You do not intervene when they start crying. You only step out if one of them tries to get physical or if I give the signal. The signal is when I say the phrase, I think it is time for you to leave. At that point, I want them removed from the premises immediately. If they resist, you have my permission to use necessary force to escort them out. I did not call the police because the police are a blunt instrument. They show up, they take statements, and they de-escalate. I did not want de-escalation. I wanted escalation followed by total domination. I wanted my family to realize that in my house, I am the law. The police would come later to file the reports, but for the main event, I needed a private army that answered only to me. Tyrell and his men took their positions in the study. I closed the doors, leaving them in the shadows. I walked back to the dining room and began to set the table. I placed the crystal wine glasses. I folded the napkins into perfect swans. I arranged the fresh hydrangeas in the center. It looked like a scene from a magazine, a beautiful Mother's Day brunch prepared by a loving daughter. But beneath the surface, the air was charged with violence. Every knife I placed on the table was sharp. Every glass was ready to be shattered. I was not just setting the table for dinner. I was setting the stage for a tragedy. The trap was armed, the security was in place, and the executioner was ready. Now I just needed the victims to walk through the door. There is a specific kind of silence that fills a room right before a storm breaks. It is not empty. It is heavy. It vibrates with potential energy. I stood in front of my vanity mirror, applying a shade of lipstick called blood red. It felt fitting for the occasion. For years, I spent my mornings getting ready to be the daughter they wanted. I wore softer colors. I smiled more. I tried to make myself smaller so my success would not cast a shadow over Marcus or make Yolanda feel insecure. I dimmed my own light to keep the peace in a house that thrived on darkness. But today was different. Today, I was not dressing for a family dinner. I was dressing for war. I pulled on my black tailored blazer. It cost more than the car Marcus was driving, but that was not the point. The point was the fit. It was structured, rigid. It was armor. I buttoned it slowly, watching the woman in the mirror transform. The desperate people-pleaser was gone. In her place stood the ruthless financial strategist who had destroyed competitors twice her age. People love to say that blood is thicker than water. They use it as a weapon to guilt you into accepting abuse. They tell you that you owe your family your loyalty no matter how much they steal from you. They tell you that cutting them off is a sin. But they forget the full quote. The blood of the covenant is thicker than the water of the womb. The bonds we choose are stronger than the ones we are forced into by biology. I have invested 32 years in the Vance Family Corporation, and the return on investment has been catastrophic. Emotional bankruptcy, financial fraud, psychological manipulation. If the Vance family was a company on the stock market, I would have shorted it a decade ago. But because they share my last name, I let them bleed me dry. I let them treat my generosity as a weakness and my silence as consent. I fastened my diamond studs, the ones I bought for myself when I made partner. They caught the light like cold stars. I looked into my own eyes. I saw sadness there, yes. It is always sad to amputate a limb, even when it is gangrenous. But mostly, I saw resolve. I checked my watch. 5:55. In 5 minutes, the elevator would ding. They would walk in expecting checks and apologies. They would walk in expecting the old Nia. The Nia who pays the bills and keeps her mouth shut. They were going to be very disappointed. The bank is closed. The audit is finished. And the liquidation is about to begin. I took one last deep breath, filling my lungs with the expensive air of the home I built with my own 2 hands. I am not losing a family tonight. I am reclaiming my life. The doorbell rang, echoing through the penthouse. It was time. The elevator doors slid open at 6:00 on the dot, and the circus finally arrived. Yolanda led the charge. She was wearing a floral dress that was loud enough to wake the dead, and a hat that belonged at the Kentucky Derby. She did not hug me. She breezed past me into the foyer, treating my home like a hotel lobby she was disappointed with. She stopped in the center of the living room and spun around, her eyes scanning the minimalist decor. "Still so much gray, Naya," she sighed, shaking her head. "It feels like a mausoleum in here. You need some life, some color. Maybe after you give us the gifts, I will send you the name of my decorator. She can fix this cold atmosphere for you." I smiled, a tight, razor-sharp smile. "I like the cold, Yolanda. It keeps things preserved." My father followed her in, carrying a bottle of cheap wine. He looked relieved. He hugged me a little too tight, whispering thank you for being reasonable in my ear. He truly believed that I had seen the light. He thought his daughter had finally learned her place. Next came Caleb and my sister Zora. The contrast between them broke my heart. Zora looked exhausted. She had dark circles under her eyes that makeup could not hide, likely from pulling double shifts. Caleb, on the other hand, looked fresh and rested. He walked with a bounce in his step, rubbing his hands together as if he was getting ready to count money. He winked at me. "Good to see you, Nia. Smart move today." But the grand entrance belonged to Marcus. He arrived 5 minutes later, loud and smelling of expensive cologne and weed. And he was not alone. Hanging off his arm was a girl I had never seen before. She was wearing a dress that was little more than a suggestion and chewing gum aggressively. "Yo, sis," Marcus shouted, dropping his keys on my console table. "Sorry we are late. Had to show Destiny the view from the bridge. This is Destiny, by the way." He did not wait for me to greet her. He walked straight to the window and pointed down to the street. "Did you see it parked out front?" he asked, beaming. "The Platinum Edition. It drives like a dream. The seats are heated, the sound system shakes the pavement. I am telling you, Nia, that truck is a beast. Thanks for handling the paperwork on that. You really came through." I walked over and looked down. I could see the white Ford F-150 parked illegally in the loading zone. It was shiny, it was massive, and legally speaking, it was mine. "It looks expensive, Marcus," I said, my voice neutral. "Only the best for the Vance family," he said, wrapping an arm around Destiny. I told Destiny that my sister is a big shot in finance, but she knows how to take care of her little brother. Destiny popped her gum. "Nice place. Do you have any vodka?" I looked at this room full of people, my stepmother criticizing my home, my brother bragging about the vehicle he stole my identity to buy, my brother-in-law waiting for a handout, my father enabling it all. They were so comfortable, they were so sure of their victory, they had no idea that the security team was standing just 10 feet away behind the frosted glass of my study. "Please, everyone sit down," I said, gesturing to the dining table. "I have prepared a very special menu, and after we eat we will get to the gifts." Yolanda clapped her hands. "I cannot wait. I hope you printed out that itinerary, Nia. I need a vacation more than you know." "Oh, I know, Yolanda," I thought as I pulled out her chair. "You are going on a trip, all right, but you are not going to like the destination." The sound of silverware scraping against fine china usually signals a polite meal, but at my table it sounded like weapons being sharpened. They devoured the lobster thermidor and vintage wine with a greed that was almost impressive. There were no thank yous. There was no conversation about my life or my career. There was only the sound of chewing and the clinking of glasses as they toasted to their own good fortune. Yolanda was already talking about the outfits she planned to wear in the Maldives. She tapped away on her phone, showing my father pictures of swimwear that cost more than his monthly pension check. My father just nodded and drank his wine faster than usual, his eyes darting around the room, as if he was waiting for the other shoe to drop. He knew me better than anyone, but even he was seduced by the promise of peace. Then Marcus did something that made the air in the room freeze. He pushed his half-eaten plate of lobster away, leaned back in his chair, and hoisted his heavy combat boots right onto the edge of my polished mahogany dining table. The mud from his soles left a dark smear on the white linen runner. I watched him, expecting my father to correct him, expecting Yolanda to tell him to have some manners. Instead, Yolanda just laughed. "Look at him," she cooed. "He looks like a king in his castle. You fit right in here, Marcus. Maybe when Nia travels for work, you can come stay here and house sit." Marcus grinned, picking a piece of lobster out of his teeth. "Yeah, I could get used to this. Hey, sis, this wine is okay, but next time get the 18-year-old scotch. Destiny likes the brown liquor." Destiny popped a bubble with her gum and wiped her greasy fingers on the edge of the tablecloth instead of her napkin. I watched the grease stain spread like a disease, but I kept my face perfectly still. That was when Caleb decided to chime in. He had been quiet, mostly focusing on eating as much free food as possible. But now, with a belly full of lobster and a head full of unearned confidence, he decided to offer me some life advice. He swirled his wine glass, looking at me with pity. "You know, Nia, this spread is fantastic. Really top-notch. But you have to admit, this apartment feels a little empty." I raised an eyebrow. "Empty? There are 7 people in here, Caleb." He shook his head, a smug smile playing on his lips. "That is not what I mean. I mean, sure, you have the money, you have the views, you have the career. But what do you really have at the end of the day? You come home to silence. A woman your age should be building a family, not just a portfolio." I glanced at Zora. She was staring at her plate, her face burning with humiliation. She knew exactly what he was doing. He was trying to lower my value to raise his own. Caleb continued, emboldened by my silence. "I mean, look at Zora and me. We might not have millions, but we have love. We have partnership. You can buy all the Chanel bags you want, Nia, but you cannot cuddle with a bank statement at night. You need to stop obsessing over money and find yourself a husband before your looks fade. Maybe if you were a little softer, a little less corporate, you would be happy like us." Happy. I looked at Zora's tired eyes. I looked at the hole in her savings account that he had caused. I looked at the mistress he was funding with her money. I took a slow sip of my wine. "You are right, Caleb," I said, my voice smooth as silk. "A bank statement cannot hug you. But do you know what a bank statement can do? It can tell the truth. It never lies about where it has been. It never cheats. And it certainly never lectures me about happiness while eating food it could not afford to buy." Caleb laughed, thinking I was joking. He raised his glass. "To family, then. And to Nia, finding a man who can handle her." I set my glass down with a deliberate click. "Actually, Caleb, I think we have done enough talking. You mentioned bank statements and happiness. It is funny you brought that up, because that leads us perfectly into the gifts I have prepared." I stood up. The room went quiet. The greed in their eyes replaced the arrogance. They thought the checkbooks were coming out. I walked to the sideboard and picked up the first envelope. It was thick. It was heavy. And it was time to wipe those smiles off their faces permanently. Just as the servers were clearing the remains of the lobster thermidor, Yolanda decided it was time for the main event. She stood up, smoothing down her floral dress, and tapped her spoon against her crystal champagne flute. The sharp ringing sound cut through the room, silencing the low hum of conversation. She looked around the table with a smile that did not reach her eyes. It was the smile of a predator who believes the prey is cornered. "I would like to propose a toast," Yolanda announced, raising her glass high. Everyone stopped eating. Marcus wiped his mouth with the back of his hand and leaned back, looking bored but expectant. Caleb swirled his wine, waiting for the show. Destiny stopped popping her gum for the first time all evening. "To family." Yolanda continued, her voice dripping with a sickly sweet sincerity that made my skin crawl. "And specifically to my beautiful stepdaughter Nia. We have had our differences in the past. We have had our misunderstandings. But tonight proves that blood is thicker than water. Nia, you have stepped up. You have shown us that you understand your duty to this family. I sat perfectly still, my hands folded in my lap. I watched her pacing around the table like a lawyer delivering a closing argument. She stopped behind Marcus and placed her hands on his shoulders, squeezing him affectionately. And because we are family, we know when to support each other. Nia, you mentioned in your text that you had a big surprise for us today. A gift that would fix everything. Well, I have a mother's intuition. Seeing Marcus here with Destiny looking so happy and ready to start their lives together, I think I know what that gift is. She looked directly at me, her eyes challenging me. You have that beautiful two-bedroom condo in Midtown that has been sitting empty since your tenant moved out last month. It is just sitting there collecting dust while your brother is trying to build a future. So I think the perfect way to show your commitment to this family would be to hand those keys over to Marcus tonight. Let him start his marriage off right. A young king needs his castle after all. The room went dead silent. Even Caleb looked surprised by the boldness of the demand. She wasn't asking for a loan anymore. She was demanding a $500,000 asset. She was banking on the fact that I would be too embarrassed to say no in front of a stranger like Destiny, and too weak to defy her in front of my father. I glanced at my father. Otis Vance, the man who was supposed to be the head of the household. He was staring intently at the stem of his wineglass, refusing to look up. His face was flushed with a mixture of wine and shame. He knew what she was doing. He knew she was using social pressure to extort real estate from his daughter. He knew it was wrong. And yet, he said absolutely nothing. He just took another large gulp of wine, trying to drown his conscience. Marcus grinned wide, showing all his teeth. That sounds fair, sis. You got this penthouse? You don't need that condo. Destiny and I could really make that place a home. Right, babe. Destiny giggled. Midtown is a great location. I love the shopping there. I looked at their expectant faces. They were so sure. They truly believed that my silence was submission. They thought the game was over, and they had won. I stood up slowly, picking up my own glass. You are right, Yolanda. I said, my voice steady and projecting to the back of the room where my security team was listening. I did say I had a surprise. And you are right that it involves property and the future of this family. I think it is time we stop with the toasts and start with the gifts. Because what I have in these envelopes is going to change everyone's living situation very quickly. Yolanda clapped her hands together, delighted. See, Otis, I told you she would do the right thing. I walked to the head of the table where the stack of envelopes lay waiting. The time for talking was done. The time for the slaughter had arrived. I picked up the first manila envelope from the stack. It was thick and heavy, just like the lies Caleb had been telling my sister for years. Caleb sat up straighter, adjusting his glasses with a greedy glint in his eyes. He thought this was the check for his cryptocurrency scheme. He thought he had successfully manipulated me into funding his gambling addiction under the guise of family unity. He reached out his hand, snapping his fingers slightly as if summoning a waiter. I did not hand the envelope to him. Instead, I walked past his outstretched hand and placed it gently in front of Zora. She looked up at me confused. Her eyes were tired, worn down by double shifts and Caleb's constant gaslighting. She looked from the envelope to her husband, who was now frowning. Open it, Zora, I said softly. This is the truth you have been too afraid to ask for. Caleb laughed nervously, looking around the table for support. Oh, come on, Nia, stop being dramatic. Just give me the check so we can celebrate. Zora, do not open that. It is probably just some boring legal paperwork for the investment. Zora ignored him. She saw the seriousness in my eyes. She slid her finger under the flap and pulled out the stack of papers. The first thing she saw was the bank statement from the family trust I managed. The one that was supposed to have $40,000 in it. Zora gasped. 4,000? Why is there only $4,000 in here? She looked at Caleb, her hands trembling. You told me the account was growing. You told me you were making deposits every month. Caleb's face went pale. It is just a market fluctuation, Zora. You do not understand how these things work. The market is down right now. Nia is just trying to confuse you with technicalities to make me look bad. It is not a fluctuation, Caleb. I said, my voice cutting through the room like a knife. It is a withdrawal. Look at the next page, Zora. See those transfers labeled Angel Investment. Now look at the lease agreement clipped to the back. Zora flipped the page. I watched the color drain from her face as she read the residential lease for a luxury apartment in Midtown. The tenant listed was not a tech startup. It was Amber, a 22-year-old graduate student, and the signature at the bottom acting as the guarantor belonged to her husband. And just in case the numbers are not enough, I added, look at the photo. Zora pulled out the glossy 8x10 photograph Jackson had taken. It showed Caleb walking out of that very apartment, holding hands with a girl who looked young enough to be his daughter. He was wearing the watch Zora had bought him for their anniversary. He looked happy. He looked expensive. And he looked nothing like the struggling entrepreneur he played at home. Caleb stood up, knocking his chair over. This is fake. Nia photoshopped this. She is trying to break us up because she is jealous of our love. Zora, baby, do not believe her. She is a bitter, lonely woman who wants everyone else to be miserable. I did not photoshop your signature on the lease, Caleb. And I did not force you to spend $300 at a steakhouse on Valentine's Day while your wife was working a 12-hour shift at the hospital. You lectured me about family. You told me I was cold. But at least I do not fund my lifestyle by stealing from the women who love me. Zora slowly stood up, holding the picture. She did not scream. She did not cry. She looked at Caleb with a terrifying calmness. The realization washed over her. The overtime shifts. The skipped vacations. The years of wearing old clothes so he could look presentable for meetings. It was all a lie. She had been funding her own betrayal. The sound of the slap was like a gunshot in the quiet dining room. Zora did not just hit him, she put 3 years of double shifts and missed holidays into that swing. Caleb's head snapped to the side and a red handprint bloomed instantly on his cheek. He stumbled back, knocking over his chair, looking at his wife with genuine fear for the first time in their marriage. Babe, listen to me, he stammered, holding his face. It is not what it looks like. Amber is just a colleague. Nia is manipulating the data. Zora picked up her glass of red wine and threw the contents directly into his face. The dark liquid dripped down his white polo shirt, looking like blood. Do not lie to me, Zora screamed, her voice raw and terrifying. I scrubbed floors for you. I stood on my feet for 12 hours a day while you were playing house with a college student. I paid for that shirt you are wearing. I paid for the food in your stomach. Caleb tried to step forward, reaching for her. Honey, please calm down. We can talk about this at home. We do not have a home, Zora yelled. I have a home. You have a lease with Amber. Go live with her. She grabbed the edge of the tablecloth right in front of his place setting and yanked it with a primal force. The china crashed to the floor. The crystal glasses shattered, sending shards flying across the room. Lobster shells and silverware clattered onto the hardwood. It was a beautiful, chaotic destruction of the false reality he had built. Get out! Zora shrieked, pointing a shaking finger at the elevator. Get out of here before I kill you! Caleb looked around the room, desperate for an ally. He looked at Yolanda. He looked at Marcus. But nobody moved. Even the narcissists knew better than to intervene in the wrath of a woman scorned. He looked at me. His eyes filled with venom. You are evil, he hissed at me. You planned this. You ruined my life because you are jealous. I took a step forward, my heels clicking on the floor. I did not ruin your life, Caleb. I just audited it. Now my sister said, get out. And if you do not leave in the next 10 seconds, I will have you removed physically. He looked at the shattered glass at his feet, then at the fury in Zora's eyes. He realized the game was over. He turned and scrambled toward the elevator, not even stopping to grab his jacket. The doors slid shut, cutting off his stammering excuses. The room fell silent, except for the sound of Zora's ragged breathing. She sank back into her chair, burying her face in her hands. The first parasite had been excised. I looked over at Marcus. He was staring at the closed elevator doors, his mouth slightly open. He didn't know it yet, but he was next. I picked up the second envelope. The elevator doors slid shut on Caleb, and the silence that followed was heavy with unsaid things. Zora was weeping softly into her napkin, but I did not have time to comfort her yet. The surgery was only half finished. I turned my attention to Marcus, who was suddenly looking much less comfortable in his chair. He pulled his combat boots off the table and sat up straight, his eyes darting between me and the black gift box I was holding. He cleared his throat, trying to regain his bravado. "Well, that was intense," he said nervously. "Caleb was always a loser anyway. But we are good, right, sis? You said you handled the truck. You said you had a surprise for me." I smiled, that same razor-sharp smile that had terrified boardrooms across Atlanta. "I did say that, Marcus. And I am a woman of my word." I walked over to him and placed the black box in front of him. It was heavy, wrapped in matte black paper with a silver ribbon. To the untrained eye, it looked like it contained a watch, or maybe the keys to the condo Yolanda had demanded. Marcus's eyes lit up. He nudged Destiny, who had stopped popping her gum to stare at the box. "See, babe, I told you she would come through. This is probably the keys to the new crib." He tore into the paper with the excitement of a child. He ripped the lid off the box, expecting to see metal glinting under the chandelier. Instead, he found a stack of crisp legal documents stapled together with a red cover sheet. His smile faltered. He pulled the papers out, frowning. "What is this, Nia? Is this the deed? Why is there so much reading?" I took a sip of my wine, watching him struggle to comprehend what was in his hands. "That is not a deed, Marcus. That is a notification of assignment." He looked up at me, confused. "Assignment of what?" "Assignment of debt," I said, my voice dropping an octave. "Specifically your debt. You see, I had a very interesting conversation with a gentleman named Silas yesterday, and another interesting chat with Summit Receivables this morning." Marcus froze. The color drained from his face, leaving him looking gray and sickly. He knew those names. He knew them because they were the monsters under his bed. "You talked to Silas," he whispered. "I did more than talk," I said, leaning in close. "I bought you Marcus. I paid Silas $15,000 to clear your gambling tab. I paid Summit $3,000 to buy your charged-off credit card debt. And when you add in the interest and the legal fees for the truck, you stole my identity to buy you currently owe me roughly $92,000. Destiny gasped, pulling away from him. "You owe her 90 grand. You told me you were a crypto millionaire." I laughed, a cold, humorless sound. "He is a millionaire in debt, Destiny. And here is the best part, Marcus. Silas breaks legs when you do not pay. I do not do that. I am a professional. I garnish wages. I seize assets. I destroy credit scores until you cannot even rent a bicycle, let alone a luxury condo." Marcus slammed the papers down. "You cannot do this. We are family. You paid it off, so it is gone." "That is what family does. That is what a victim does," I corrected him. "I am not a victim anymore. I am your creditor, and I am calling in the loan immediately. Since you have no income and no assets, I am exercising my right to repossess the collateral." I pulled a remote control from my blazer pocket and pressed the button that opened the sheer curtains. "Look down, Marcus." He ran to the window. Down on the street, a tow truck had just backed up to the white Ford F-150. A man in a jumpsuit was already hooking up the chains. "Hey!" he screamed, banging on the glass. "Hey, stop that! That is my truck!" "It is my truck," I said calmly, "and it is being sold to cover a fraction of what you owe me. As for the rest, you can work it off. I hear McDonald's is hiring." Destiny stood up, grabbing her purse. "You are broke," she spat at him. "You are broke and you live with your mom." She didn't even wait for a response. She walked out, leaving Marcus staring down at the street as his status symbol was dragged away into the night. He turned to me, his eyes full of tears, but I felt nothing. The second parasite had been neutralized. Now there was only one left. The queen bee herself. Yolanda. The mechanical whine of the hydraulic lift drifted up from the street below, cutting through the silence of the penthouse like a dentist drill. Marcus pressed his face against the cold glass, watching his identity being towed away. That truck was not just a vehicle to him. It was his ego. It was the lie he told the world about who he was. It was the metal shell he used to hide his insecurities. And as the tow truck driver secured the chains dragging the pristine white bumper into the air, I watched Marcus crumble. "No," he whispered, his breath fogging up the window. "You cannot do this. It is leased. You are ruining my credit." I took a sip of my wine, standing right behind him. "I am not ruining your credit, Marcus. You did that years ago. I am just cleaning up the mess, and for the record, it is not leased anymore. It is repossessed. By me." He spun around. The tears were gone, replaced by a feral rage. He looked at me, and he did not see his sister. He saw the enemy. He saw the person who had just stripped him naked in front of his girlfriend and destroyed his fantasy life. His hands curled into fists. The veins in his neck bulged. "You think you are so smart," he spat, stepping toward me. "You think because you have money you can just humiliate me. You are nothing. You are just a lonely, miserable bitch." I did not flinch. I did not step back. I just watched him come, because I knew something he did not. "I will kill you," he screamed, lunging across the room, his arm raised to strike. My father shouted, "Marcus, no," but he was too slow to stop him. I stood my ground perfectly still. Before Marcus could get within striking distance, the frosted glass doors of the study burst open. Tyrell moved with the speed of a striking cobra. He intercepted Marcus in mid-air, grabbing his wrist and twisting it behind his back in a fluid motion that used Marcus' own momentum against him. There was a loud crack as Marcus' shoulder popped, and then he hit the floor with a sickening thud. Tyrell had his knee in the small of Marcus' back, pinning him to the hardwood like a bug. The other two guards fanned out, securing the room, their eyes scanning for threats. Marcus screamed in pain and shock, his face pressed against the floorboards. "Get off me! Dad, help me! She is crazy!" My father jumped up, knocking his chair over his hands, shaking. "Nia, what are you doing? Call them off. That is your brother." I looked down at Marcus, squirming under Tyrell's weight. I looked at the fist that was just inches away from my face a moment ago. "No, Dad," I said, my voice ice cold. "That is a debtor who just attempted to assault a creditor, and in the state of Georgia, that is a felony." Tyrell looked up at me, awaiting orders. "Do you want us to call the police, Ms. Vance?" I considered it. I looked at Marcus, pathetic and broken, on the floor. I looked at Yolanda, who was clutching her pearls in genuine terror. "Not yet," I said. "Get him out of here. Escort him to the street. He can walk home. It will give him time to think about a payment plan. And if he ever steps foot on this property again, break his other arm." Tyrell hauled Marcus up by his collar, dragging him toward the door. Marcus was sobbing now, pleading with me, but I turned my back on him. The elevator doors opened, and Tyrell threw him inside. As the doors closed, cutting off his wails, I felt a surge of adrenaline. The physical threat was gone. Now it was just me and the final boss, Yolanda. The silence that followed the scuffle was broken only by the sound of Marcus weeping. It was a pathetic, jagged sound that stripped away every ounce of the street-tough persona he had tried to cultivate. Tyrell had released his grip just enough for Marcus to scramble across the floor, not toward the door, but toward the only safety he had ever known. He crawled on his hands and knees, grabbing onto my father, pant-leg like a toddler terrified of a thunderstorm. "Dad, please," he sobbed, burying his face in the fabric of my father's cheap slacks. "Do not let her do this. She is stealing my life. She is ruining me. Make her stop, Dad. You are the head of this house. Tell her." My father looked down at his son, the boy he had coddled and protected from every consequence for 30 years. He reached down a trembling hand to stroke Marcus' hair. His eyes were wet with tears as he looked up at me. It was the look of a man who had run out of options. "Naya, enough," Otis said, his voice cracking. "You have made your point. You scared him. Now call off the dogs. I will pay for the truck. I will write you a check tomorrow for the gambling debt. Just let him go. We can fix this. We are family." I looked at them. Debt. The tableau was almost religious in its tragedy, the father sacrificing himself for the prodigal son. But they forgot that I was the one keeping the ledger, and the accounts were long overdue. I took a slow, deliberate step closer, my heels clicking on the hardwood like the ticking of a clock. "You will write me a check." I repeated, my voice flat and devoid of emotion. "With what money, Dad?" Otis blinked, confusion clouding his grief. "With my savings. With the retirement fund. I have money, Nia. I can cover him." I let out a soft, chilling laugh. "It is truly heartbreaking how little you know about your own life, Otis. You think you are the patriarch. You think you have the power to fix this. But you are not the savior here. You are just another victim in waiting." I gestured to the last envelope on the table, the one that sat in front of Yolanda. "You cannot help him, Dad, because you are about to be destitute. You do not have a retirement fund anymore. You do not have savings. In fact, if you do not listen to me very carefully in the next 5 minutes, you might not even have a house to sleep in tonight." Otis looked from me to Yolanda, who was sitting frozen in her chair, her face a mask of sudden terror. He pulled his leg away from Marcus' grip, stepping back as the realization hit him. "What are you talking about, Nia?" he whispered. "I am talking about the fact that your wife has been busy while you were playing bridge," I said. "I am talking about the fact that half of your assets are currently being funneled into a motel room on the south side. You are not in a position to negotiate for Marcus' freedom, Dad. You are in a position where you need to beg me to save you from ending up in a state-run nursing home." Marcus stopped crying. He looked up, sensing the shift in the room. The air had changed. The target was no longer the son. It was the father. And the weapon was the secret I was about to expose. I turned my gaze to Yolanda. She looked small now. The arrogance was gone. She knew what was in that envelope. "Open it, Yolanda," I commanded. "Show my father why he cannot afford to bail out his son. Show him where his money really went." I picked up the silver remote control from the center of the table. It felt heavy and cold in my hand, like a judge gavel. Yolanda was staring at it, her eyes wide with a primal panic. She knew what was coming. She tried to stand up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor, but her legs gave out, and she slumped back down. "You mentioned earlier that you wanted a vacation, Yolanda. You sent me a link to a bungalow in the Maldives. You said you needed to heal. But based on the footage I have here, it looks like you have already been taking plenty of little trips. Just not with my father." I pointed the remote at the 85-inch screen mounted above the fireplace. I pressed play. The room was instantly filled with the footage from Jackson's surveillance camera. It was not the Maldives. It was the parking lot of the Starlight Motel on the edge of town. The timestamp in the corner read 2 weeks ago, Tuesday, 7:14 p.m. The camera zoomed in. The resolution was crystal clear thanks to the high-definition setup I had installed specifically for this moment. There was the white Lexus my father paid for, and there was Yolanda stepping out wearing a tight red dress I had never seen before. She looked happy. She looked young. She looked nothing like the devoted wife she played at Sunday dinners. And then he stepped into the frame. DeAndre, the personal trainer, the man she had introduced to us as her distant cousin from Macon. My father let out a strangled sound like an animal in a trap. "No. That is DeAndre. That is her cousin." "Keep watching, Dad," I said, my voice void of pity. On the screen, Yolanda threw her arms around DeAndre's neck. She kissed him. It was not a cousinly peck on the cheek. It was a long, passionate embrace that left no room for interpretation. The surround sound system amplified the sound of their laughter as they pulled apart. Then came the money shot. Literally. Yolanda reached into her purse and pulled out a thick white envelope. She handed it to him. He opened it and fanned out the cash. Hundreds, thousands, my father's pension, my father's savings, the money I had given them for the roof repair. Yolanda lunged for the remote, screaming, "Turn it off! Turn it off right now! You are sick, Nia. This is private." Tyrell stepped forward, blocking her path without even raising his hands. She bounced off his chest and fell back against the table, knocking over a vase of hydrangeas. Water spilled across the floor, mixing with the shards of glass from earlier. I did not turn it off. I let it play. I let them watch as she led him into room 104. I let them see the betrayal in high definition. "That is $5,000 in that envelope, Dad," I narrated, pointing at the screen like a weatherman predicting a hurricane. "She gives him that allowance every month. That is why you cannot afford to fix the air conditioning. That is why you are driving a 10-year-old car. You are not just supporting a wife, you are sponsoring a gigolo." My father stood up slowly. He looked from the screen to Yolanda. His face was gray. The denial that had protected him for years finally shattered under the weight of the pixels. "Cousin," he whispered, his voice breaking. "You told me he was family. I grilled steaks for him. I let him sleep in my guest room." I shook his hand. Yolanda was sobbing now, curled up on the floor near Marcus' feet. "It is not what it looks like, Otis. He needed help. He was in trouble." "He was in trouble," I interrupted. "And you were in love, or lust. It does not matter. What matters is that you breached the marital contract. And in the state of Georgia, adultery bars you from receiving alimony." I pressed the stop button, freezing the image of Yolanda kissing her lover on the giant screen. It loomed over the room, a towering monument to her deceit. "Happy Mother Day." "Yolanda," I said, placing the remote back on the table. "I hope the motel room was worth it. Because it just cost you everything. You might be able to forgive the infidelity, Dad, because some men are weak like that. But I do not think you will be able to forgive the embezzlement. You see, cheating is a moral failing, but stealing from a 65-year-old man on a fixed income is a financial crime. And Yolanda has been very busy moving your money around." I reached into the centerpiece and pulled out the final document. It was not a photo. It was a forensic accounting spreadsheet, color-coded for easy reading. I slid it across the mahogany table toward my father. He looked at it like it was a death certificate. His hands were shaking so bad he could barely hold the paper. "Look at line 4, Dad. Do you remember that roof leak last winter? You told me it cost $12,000 to fix. I gave you the check. You deposited it into the joint account. Now look at the withdrawal column for the same day." Otis squinted at the paper, his eyes filling with tears. "It says transfer to Cash App." "Exactly. And do you know whose Cash App handle that is? It belongs to DeAndre. You have been living with a bucket under a drip in the hallway for 6 months because Yolanda told you the contractor was backed up. There was no contractor. There was only her boyfriend and his car payment." Yolanda tried to crawl toward him, grasping at his leg again. "Otis, listen to me. It was a loan. He was going to pay it back. I was investing for us." I cut her off with a sharp laugh. "Investing? Is that what we are calling it now? Let us look at the next page, Dad. This one is the big one. Your 401k. The nest egg you worked 40 years at the plant to build. You told me you had about $200,000 saved up for retirement. You were planning to buy a boat. You were planning to rest." Otis flipped the page. I watched the color drain from his face until he looked like a ghost. He dropped the paper. It fluttered to the floor, landing in the puddle of spilled water. "It is gone," he whispered. "It says zero balance. It is gone, Dad. She forged your signature on a hardship withdrawal form 3 years ago. She claimed you had medical expenses. She liquidated the entire account. The penalties were massive, but she did not care. She took the cash and she bought him that Dodge Challenger. She bought him the gold chain he wears in the video. She bought him the very bed they are sleeping in at that motel." I walked over and stood over my father. I did not feel pity. I felt the cold satisfaction of a surgeon who has finally cut out the tumor. "You are not retiring next year, Dad. You are not buying a boat. You are going to be greeting customers at Walmart until you are 80, because the woman you chose over your own children stole your future. She stripped you for parts, she ate your retirement, and she did it while looking you in the eye and telling you she loved you. Otis let out a sound that was half scream, half sob. He looked down at Yolanda, who was still clinging to his ankle. The love in his eyes was gone, replaced by the terrifying clarity of a man who realizes he has been played for a fool. He kicked her off him, sending her sprawling back into the mess she had made. "You stole my life!" he roared, his voice shaking the walls. "I worked double shifts. I broke my back. And you gave it to him." I leaned against the sideboard, crossing my arms. "She did not just give it to him, Dad. She paid him to tolerate her. And you paid for the privilege of being deceived. But do not worry. I have already contacted the fraud department. The police are on their way to take a report. But I doubt you will get the money back. It is likely already spent on rims and bottle service. You are broke, Otis, and it is entirely your fault for trusting a snake." The sound of the baccarat crystal hitting the floor was louder than the shout. It did not just break, it exploded. Red wine splashed across the hem of Yolanda's floral dress and soaked into the expensive Persian rug I had bought last year. But Otis did not even flinch. He just stared at his empty hand, as if wondering how he had lost his grip on everything so quickly. He looked down at Yolanda. For the last 10 years, this woman had been his sun and moon. He had alienated his friends for her. He had neglected his children for her. He had literally worked himself into a hernia repair surgery to buy her the things she said she needed to feel secure. And now, staring at the forensic accounting of his own ruin, the filter finally fell away. He did not see the charming, vulnerable woman he married. He saw a leech. He saw the cold calculation in her eyes that he had mistaken for concern. He saw the years of gaslighting, the lines about how I was just jealous, or how Marcus needed a second chance. He realized that every time she told him, "Let me handle the finances, baby. You work too hard," it was part of a long con, and he was the mark. Yolanda tried to stand up, slipping in the wine and the water from the flowers. "Otis, please," she begged, reaching for his hand. Her voice was high and frantic, the sound of a cornered animal. "It is just numbers. We can fix it. I will get it back from DeAndre. He promised me a return on investment." Otis took a step back, moving as if he were underwater. He looked at her hand, the hand wearing the diamond ring he had refinanced his truck to buy, as if it were a venomous snake. "Do not touch me," he whispered. The silence in the room amplified his voice. It was not angry. It was dead. "You spent my life, Yolanda. I trusted you. I defended you against my own daughter." He looked over at me. His eyes were red-rimmed and hollow. For the first time in a decade, he really saw me. He did not see the ATM machine. He did not see the stubborn daughter who would not just get along. He saw the only person in the room who had not lied to him. He saw the person he had betrayed to protect the woman who was currently robbing him blind. "I remember when you told me to be the bigger person, Dad," I said, my voice cutting through the tension. "I remember in the parking lot when you said her hormones were making her spend money. Was it hormones when she forged your signature on the retirement withdrawal? Was it menopause when she booked the motel room? Or was she just playing you?" Otis closed his eyes. A single tear tracked through the wrinkles on his cheek. I could see the shame burning him alive. It is a terrible thing to realize you have been the villain in your own child story because you were too weak to see the monster in your bed. He looked back down at Yolanda, who was now sobbing into the rug, ruining her makeup. "Get up," he said, his voice finding a shred of steel. "Get up and get out of my sight. You are not my wife. You are a thief, and I never want to see you again." Yolanda froze. She looked up, realizing the act was not working. The tears stopped instantly. The mask slipped completely. She stood up, wiping the wine from her dress, and glared at him with pure hatred. "Fine," she spat. "You were boring anyway." And broke. She turned to leave, but I stepped in front of her, blocking the exit. "Not so fast, Yolanda. You are leaving, but not with that bag." And certainly not with my father's car keys. Yolanda was clutching her fake Chanel bag like a shield, but I was not done dismantling her. I signaled Tyrell with a quick nod. He stepped in front of the elevator, crossing his massive arms, blocking her path. You are not going anywhere just yet, Yolanda. We have one last piece of business to conduct before you are escorted off the premises. I reached into my briefcase, which had been sitting by my feet the entire dinner. The leather felt cool under my fingers. I pulled out the document I had spent 3 nights drafting with my attorney. It was thick, it was comprehensive, and it was the only thing that could save my father from total ruin. I slapped the document onto the wet table right next to the puddle of spilled wine. The paper soaked up the red liquid, turning the edges pink like a fresh wound. "Dad," I said, my voice demanding his full attention. "Look at this." Otis wiped his eyes, trying to focus through the fog of shock and alcohol. He looked at the bold letters at the top of the page. Petition for dissolution of marriage. "What is this, Nia?" he whispered, his voice trembling. "It is a divorce filing, Dad. Contested. Fault-based. Citing adultery and financial misappropriation. I have already filled out everything. I listed the house, the remaining assets, the debts she racked up in your name. I have attached the photographic evidence of the affair and the forensic accounting of the theft. All you have to do is sign on the dotted line." Otis looked at the paper, then at Yolanda, who was staring at him with a mixture of fear and defiance. He looked back at me, his hands shaking violently. "Nia, I need time. This is too much. I cannot just sign this right now. We need to talk about this. Can we not do this tomorrow?" I slammed my hand down on the table, making the silverware jump. "No, Dad. There is no tomorrow. There is only right now." I knew my father. I knew that if I let him walk out of this room without signing, he would go home and sit in his favorite chair. He would look at the photos of their wedding. He would let her cry and apologize. He would convince himself that he could forgive her because he was terrified of being alone. He was an addict, and she was his drug. I had to stage an intervention. "You have spent 10 years choosing her over me, Dad," I said, my voice dropping to a low, intense register. "You chose her comfort over my dignity. You chose her lies over my truth. You let her steal from me. You let her son abuse me. And I stood by and took it because I wanted a father. I wanted you to love me enough to protect me, but you never did." I uncapped my expensive fountain pen. The gold nib glinted under the chandelier. I held it out to him. "But I am done begging, Otis. I am done being the bigger person. You have a choice to make, right here, right now. You can sign that paper and cut this cancer out of your life, or you can walk out that door with her." He looked at me, his eyes wide with panic. "Nia, please." I did not blink. "If you leave with her, Dad, you lose me. I mean it. I will block your number. I will sell the note on the house I helped you refinance. I will let the creditors come for you. You will never see me again. You will die alone in that house with a woman who hates you and is waiting for you to die so she can cash the insurance check." I shoved the pen into his shaking hand. "So who is it going to be, Dad? The thief who stole your retirement and slept with her cousin? Or the daughter who is trying to save your life? Sign the paper, or say goodbye to me forever." The scratching of the pen against the paper was the loudest sound in the world. It was a jagged, frantic sound like an animal clawing at a trap. My father's hand shook so violently that the signature looked more like a seismograph reading of an earthquake than his name, but it was there. Otis Vance. With that ink, he severed a decade of manipulation. He cut the cord that had been strangling his finances and his relationship with his only loyal child. He dropped the expensive fountain pen onto the table and it rolled away, stopping against the wine-stained divorce petition. He did not look at Yolanda. He slumped back in his chair, burying his face in his hands, his shoulders heaving with the weight of what he had just done. He looked smaller somehow, older, but for the first time in years, he looked free. I snatched the papers up before the ink could even dry. I slid them into my briefcase and locked the latches with a satisfying dual click. It was done. The legal firewall was up. Yolanda let out a shriek that was pure, unadulterated rage. You cannot do this, Otis. You are making a mistake. You are going to die alone without me. Who is going to take care of you? Who is going to love you? I signaled Tyrell. The time for conversation was over. Remove her, I said, my voice flat and final. And make sure she does not take anything that does not belong to her. That bag stays. The car keys stay. Tyrell moved with the efficiency of a machine. He grabbed Yolanda by the upper arm, not roughly, but with a firmness that made it clear resistance was futile. She tried to claw at him, her nails digging into his suit jacket, but he did not even flinch. He marched her toward the elevator where the other guard was waiting. My bag! She screamed, reaching back toward the table. My Chanel bag! That is a counterfeit, Yolanda, I called out as they dragged her away. Just like your marriage. The elevator doors slid open, revealing Marcus, who was huddled in the corner of the cab, nursing his shoulder and looking like a wet rat. Tyrell shoved Yolanda inside. She stumbled, colliding with her son. The two of them, the architect of my misery and her favorite project, were finally where they belonged. Together and cornered. Get out of my building, I said, as the doors began to close. And if I see either of you near my father again, I will not call the police. I will call Silas. The doors shut, cutting off Yolanda wailing mid-scream. I walked to the floor-to-ceiling window and looked down. A storm had broken over Atlanta. The sky, which had been gray all day, finally opened up, unleashing a torrent of rain that battered the glass. It was a deluge. A biblical cleansing. I watched as the service doors of the building opened 40 floors below. Two small figures were shoved out onto the sidewalk. They had no umbrellas. They had no luxury SUV waiting for them. They stood there for a moment, stunned by the sudden cold and the violence of the storm. Yolanda, in her ruined floral dress, and Marcus in his combat boots, looked like ghosts. The rain soaked them instantly, plastering their clothes to their bodies, washing away the pretension and the arrogance. They stood there arguing on the curb, pointing fingers at each other, their voices lost in the thunder. The wind whipped around them, tearing at their clothes. It was the first time in their lives they were facing the elements without my father umbrella to shield them. I watched until they finally turned and started walking aimlessly into the dark, wet night. The apartment was quiet now. The air felt lighter. I turned back to the room where my father sat weeping softly at the table. The storm was raging outside, but inside the house the cleaning was finally complete. It has been 7 days since the storm washed the trash out of my building and into the gutter where it belonged. 7 days of blissful silence in my penthouse. But while my home has been quiet, the district attorney office has been deafeningly loud. I did not just kick Yolanda out. I handed the state of Georgia a conviction wrapped in a red legal folder. The evidence regarding the fraudulent truck loan was irrefutable. The digital footprint proved she accessed my personal data. But the real nail in her coffin was the forgery on my father's retirement account. Stealing from a spouse is a civil matter in divorce court, but forging a signature to liquidate a 401k without consent is a federal crime. It is wire fraud. It is identity theft. And because my father is over 65, it is classified as elder abuse. Jackson sent me the update this morning, along with a photo that tasted sweeter than any vintage wine I have ever owned. Yolanda was not staying at the Ritz. She was not even staying at a Holiday Inn. She was back at the Starlight Motel, the very same place she used to meet her lover. The irony was poetic. Only this time she was not paying for the room with my father's pension checks. She was paying with the cash she got from pawning the fake jewelry she had collected over the years. But the tragedy of Yolanda Vance is not that she got caught. It is that she actually believed the fantasy she was paying for. According to Jackson's surveillance logs, the first call she made after being evicted was to DeAndre. She called him desperate and crying. She told him she had left her husband. She told him she was finally free to be with him. She expected him to rush over in his Dodge Challenger and sweep her off her feet. She thought their love was real. She thought the $5,000 allowance was just a gift, not a salary. DeAndre did not send a car. He did not send flowers. He blocked her number. When she finally got through to him using the motel lobby phone, he did not mince words. He told her exactly what she was to him. A pay stub. He said the money stopped flowing, Yolanda, so the ride is over. You are old and you are broke. Do not call me again. That was the moment that broke her. Not the divorce, not the eviction, but the realization that she had destroyed her life for a man who saw her as nothing more than an aging ATM machine. 2 hours later, the police arrived at room 104. They had a warrant for her arrest on 3 counts of fraud and 1 count of grand larceny. They found her sitting on the edge of the cheap mattress staring at a blank TV screen. She did not fight them. She did not scream about her rights or demand to speak to her lawyer because she could not afford one. She just held out her hands and let them click the metal cuffs onto her wrists. I watched the body cam footage later. She looked small. She looked tired. She looked like a woman who had gambled everything on a lie and lost. She wanted a life of excitement and danger. Well, she got it. She is now the star of her very own criminal investigation. And as for DeAndre, I am not worried about him getting away with it. I forwarded his Cash App history to the IRS this morning. He will be joining her in the legal system very soon. Justice is not just blind. In my hands, it is thorough. While Yolanda was trading her dignity for a motel room key, the men of the Vance family were discovering that gravity is a harsh mistress. They had spent years floating on a cloud of other people's money, but the atmosphere had finally evaporated, and they hit the ground with a bone-shattering thud. Caleb was the first to realize that his charm had no currency in the real world. Zora did not just file for divorce, she executed a tactical scorched earth policy. She changed the locks on the apartment an hour after the dinner. She contacted the bank and froze the joint accounts. She even called the leasing office of the luxury apartment where Amber lived and informed them that the guarantor was withdrawing his support effective immediately. I heard through the grapevine that Caleb tried to crash on Amber's couch that first night. He showed up with his suitcase and a bouquet of gas station flowers, thinking he could pivot from husband to full-time boyfriend. But Amber was a pragmatist. She did not want a middle-aged roommate with bad credit and a pending lawsuit. She left him standing in the hallway. Now the man who lectured me about family values is sleeping in his car. He is currently representing himself in divorce court because he cannot afford a retainer. Zora is going for full custody of her financial future, and she will get it. Caleb is walking away with nothing but his clothes and a laptop full of failed business plans. The entrepreneur is now just unemployed. But Marcus's fate was a special project of mine. I did not want him homeless. Homelessness is too passive. It allows for victimhood. I wanted him employed. I wanted him to understand the value of $1 by sweating for every single cent. Since I held the judgment on his debt, I had the legal right to garnish his wages. But first he needed wages to garnish. I made a few calls to a commercial cleaning company that contracts with some of the buildings I manage. I told them I knew a young man who was desperate for work and had a court-ordered obligation to pay. They were hiring for the night shift. 3 days later, Marcus put on a neon yellow vest and a pair of heavy work boots. He was not driving a platinum Ford F-150 anymore. He was pushing a mop bucket across the marble floors of a corporate lobby, the same kind of lobby he used to walk through like he owned the place. I set up the garnishment order to be aggressive. The state allows me to take 25% of his disposable earnings. Every 2 weeks when he gets his paycheck, a quarter of it is automatically routed to my account before he can even buy a pack of cigarettes. I stopped by his work site last night just to check on my investment. I watched from my car as he hauled a heavy bag of trash to the dumpster. He looked tired. He looked humbled. He wasn't the crypto king anymore. He was just a man with a broom and a debt. He saw me watching him. For a second, I thought he would scream or throw something. But he just looked at me and then looked down at his boots. He went back to scrubbing. He is finally learning the lesson I should have taught him years ago. Freedom isn't free, Marcus. And until you pay me back every dime of that $92,000, you belong to me. The repo was not just for the truck. It was for his ego, and I am charging interest. It took 3 weeks for the dust to settle. 3 weeks of lawyers drafting motions and forensic accountants combing through the wreckage of my father's finances. But eventually, the silence in my phone broke. It was not a text asking for a loan. It was a simple request for coffee. I met him at a small diner downtown, away from the penthouse and away from the memories of that disastrous dinner. Otis sat in a booth staring into a black coffee. He looked older. The divorce proceedings had aged him, but the heavy fog of denial was gone from his eyes. He wasn't wearing the expensive watch Yolanda had made him buy. He was wearing his old flannel shirt, the one he used to wear before he tried to buy her love. He stood up when I walked in. He didn't try to hug me immediately. He just looked at me with a mixture of shame and pride. "I am sorry, Nia," he said, his voice rough. "I am so sorry. I let them use you. I let them treat you like a resource instead of a daughter. I was so afraid of being alone that I sold out my own child." I sat down across from him. Hearing him say it was vindication, but it was also painful. It is hard to hear your hero admit he was a coward. "You did, Dad," I said simply. "You watched them bleed me dry and you held the bucket." He nodded, tears welling in his eyes. "I know, and I know I cannot pay you back for the money. The retirement account is gone. The house equity is drained. I am starting over at 65. I reached across the table and took his hand. It was calloused and shaking. "I do not want the money back, Dad. I wrote that off a long time ago. I want a father. But we need to be very clear about what that means moving forward." I pulled my hand back, creating a physical space between us on the table. "I love you. I will always make sure you have food in your fridge and a roof over your head. I will help you navigate the legal mess with Yolanda. But the Bank of Nia is closed. Permanently." Otis looked up at me, listening intently. "That means no loans," I continued, my voice steady and unyielding. "No emergency cash for Marcus. No investment capital for your friends. No bailing out cousins. My money is my money. It is the product of my labor and my sacrifice. You are never allowed to ask me for $1 again. If you do, the conversation ends and I walk away. Do you understand?" He took a deep breath. He didn't argue. He didn't try to negotiate. For the first time, he respected the boundary because he finally respected me. "I understand," he said. "I don't want your money, Nia. I just want my daughter back." "Then we have a deal," I said, signaling the waitress. We drank our coffee in silence, but it was a comfortable silence. The transaction was over. The power dynamic had shifted. I was no longer the little girl seeking approval through generosity. I was the woman who had saved him from himself. We were not fixing the past. We were building a future based on the only currency that actually matters: respect. And for the first time in years, I enjoyed a meal with my father without wondering how much it was going to cost me. The silence in my penthouse used to feel heavy, like a judgment. It used to feel like evidence of my failure to be the warm, maternal figure my family wanted me to be. But tonight, as I sit in my favorite armchair with a first edition novel and a cup of chamomile tea, the silence feels different. It feels like luxury. It feels like the clean, sterile air of a recovery room after a life-saving operation. We are raised on the myth of the family tree. We are told that the roots are sacred and the branches must be supported at all costs. We are taught that cutting off a relative is a sin against nature. But any gardener will tell you that if a branch is diseased, you do not water it. You do not pray for it to get better while it infects the rest of the trunk. You get the shears. You cut it off. You seal the wound. And you let the healthy parts of the tree survive. For 10 years, I watered a dead garden. I poured my salary, my energy, and my sanity into soil that was too toxic to grow anything but weeds. I thought that if I just gave a little more, if I just wrote one more check or forgave one more insult, they would finally bloom into the loving family I desperately wanted. But parasites do not bloom. They feed. Yolanda was not a mother figure. She was a blight. Marcus was not a struggling young man. He was a rot, spreading through the foundation of my father's life. Caleb was a pest devouring my sister's happiness. And my father, God help him, was the host who was too weak to shake them off. I did not destroy my family. I pruned it. I look at the peace around me. My phone is on the table and it is not buzzing with demands. My bank account is growing, not shrinking. My sister Zora called me yesterday not to cry about money but to tell me she signed a lease on a studio apartment. She sounded tired, but she sounded like herself again. My father is working part-time and living in a small, clean apartment I helped him find. He is lonely sometimes, but he is no longer being slowly poisoned by a woman who despised him. People call it cold. They call it ruthless. They say you only get one family. But I disagree. You get the family you choose to keep. You get the family you are willing to fight for. And sometimes fighting for your family means fighting against the people who share your last name. I turn the page of my book. The paper feels crisp under my fingers. I am not lonely. I am solitary. There is a difference. Loneliness is the poverty of self. Solitude is the richness of self. I have reclaimed my time. I have reclaimed my resources. And most importantly, I have reclaimed my dignity. The necrosis is gone. The wound has healed. And for the first time in my life, I am not just surviving the Vance family legacy. I am thriving in spite of it. I stand by the glass wall looking down at the city of Atlanta one last time. The rain has stopped and the streets below are glistening under the streetlights. Somewhere down there in the maze of traffic and noise, Marcus is finishing his shift pushing a mop. Somewhere in a quiet studio apartment, my sister Zora is sleeping soundly for the first time in years. And somewhere in a cell, Yolanda is realizing that actions have consequences. The final bill for that Mother's Day dinner was astronomical. Between the private investigators, the forensic accountants, the purchase of Marcus' bad debt, and the legal fees for my father's divorce, I spent close to $150,000. That is the price of a luxury car. That is a down payment on a house. To some people, that sounds like a waste. They will say I should have just walked away. They will say I was vindictive. But they are looking at the expense column without seeing the value proposition. I did not just spend money. I made an investment. I bought my father dignity back. I bought my sister a future free of financial abuse. And most importantly, I bought my own freedom. I bought the right to wake up on a Sunday morning without dreading a text message asking for a loan. I bought the right to walk into my own home without feeling like an intruder. I bought the silence that fills this room right now. Yolanda wanted the most expensive gift I could afford. She wanted a trip to the Maldives. She wanted a life of leisure funded by my sweat. Well, I gave her something even more valuable. I gave her justice. It was the most expensive Mother's Day gift in the history of the Vance family, but it was worth every single cent. We often think of freedom as something we are born with, but for some of us, freedom is a luxury item. It is something we have to purchase with hard choices and uncomfortable truths. It is something we have to defend with boundaries that are as strong as steel. I turn away from the window and pick up my wine glass. The reflection in the mirror shows a woman who is tired but unbroken. A woman who knows exactly what she is worth and refuses to offer a discount ever again. Now I have a question for you. We all have a Yolanda in our lives. We all have a Marcus draining our energy or a Caleb gaslighting our reality. Maybe they are not family. Maybe they are friends or partners. But they are there charging you a tax on your happiness every single day. So tell me, what is the price of your peace? Have you ever had to buy your way out of a toxic relationship? Have you ever had to pay the ransom to get your life back? Tell me your story in the comments. Because if there is one thing I have learned, it is that the only bad investment is investing in people who do not invest in you. My name is Nia Vance, and this audit is officially closed. We are conditioned to believe that family loyalty is a debt we must pay forever, even at the cost of our own survival. However, Nia Vance proves that true loyalty must be reciprocal. When support becomes exploitation, you are not a family member. You are simply a host to a parasite. The most valuable asset on your balance sheet is not your bank account, but your peace of mind. Sometimes you must be willing to pay a high price to sever the ties that bind you to toxicity. You cannot buy happiness, but you can certainly buy your freedom. Drop a freedom in the comments if you are ready to audit your circle today.